Chapter 3, Elko County, Nevada. Ernie Black was afraid of the dark. Indoor darkness was bad, but the darkness of the outdoors, the vast blackness of night here in northern Nevada, was what most terrified Ernie. During the day, he favored rooms with several lamps and lots of windows, but at night he preferred rooms with few windows, or even no windows at all, because sometimes it seemed to him that the night was pressing against the glass, as if it were a living creature that wanted to get in at him and gobble him up. He obtained no relief from drawing the drapes, for he still knew the night was out there, waiting for its chance. He was deeply ashamed of himself. He did not know why he had recently become afraid of the dark. He just was. Millions of people shared his phobia, of course, but nearly all of them were children. Ernie was 52. On Friday afternoon, the day after Thanksgiving, he worked alone in the motel office because Faye had flown to Wisconsin to visit Lucy, Frank, and the grandkids. She would not be back until Tuesday. Come December, they intended to close up for a week and both go to Milwaukee for Christmas with the kids. But this time Faye had gone by herself. Ernie missed her terribly. He missed her because she was his wife of 31 years and his best friend. He missed her because he loved her more now than he had on their wedding day, and because, without Faye, the nights alone seemed longer, deeper, darker than ever. By 2:30 Friday afternoon, he had cleaned all the rooms and changed the linens, and the Tranquility Motel was ready for its next wave of journeyers. It was the only lodging within 12 miles, perched on a knoll north of the superhighway, a neat little way station on a vast expanse of sagebrush-strewn plains that sloped up into grassy meadows. Elko lay over 30 miles to the east, Battle Mountain 40 miles to the west, the town of Carlin and the tiny village of Beowulf were closer, though from the Tranquility Motel, Ernie had not a glimpse of either settlement. In fact, from the parking lot, no other building was visible in any direction, and there was probably no motel in the world more aptly named than this one. Ernie was now in the office, working with a can of wood stain, touching up a few scratches on the oak counter where guests signed in and checked out. The counter was not really in bad shape. He was just keeping busy until customers started pulling in from Interstate 80 in the late afternoon. If he did not keep his mind occupied, he would start thinking about how early dusk arrived in November, and he would begin to worry about nightfall, and then by the time darkness actually came, he would be as jumpy as a cat with a can tied to its tail. The motel office was a shrine to light. From the moment he had opened at 6:30 this morning, every lamp had been burning. A squat fluorescent lamp with a flexible neck stood on the oak desk in the work area behind the check-in counter, casting a pale rectangle on the green felt blotter. A brass floor lamp glowed in the corner by the file cabinets. On the public side of the counter was a carousel of postcards, a wall rack holding about 40 paperbacks, another rack full of free travel brochures, a single slot machine by the door, and a beige sofa flanked by end tables and ginger jar lamps, equipped with three-way bulbs, 75, 100, and 150 watts, which were turned up all the way. There was a frosted glass ceiling picture, too, with two bulbs, and of course, most of the front wall of the office featured a large window. The motel faced south-southwest, so at this time of day, the declining sun's honey-colored beams angled through the enormous pane, giving an amber tint to the white wall behind the sofa, fracturing into hundreds of bright, erratic lines in the crackled glaze of the ginger jar lamps, and leaving blazing reflections in the brass medallions that ornamented the tables. When Faye was here, Ernie left some of the lamps off because she was sure to remark on the waste of electricity and extinguish a few of them. Leaving a lamp unlit made him uneasy, but he endured the sight of dead bulbs in order to keep his secret. As far as he knew, Faye was not aware of the phobia that had been creeping up on him during the past 4 months, and he did not want her to know because he was ashamed of this sudden strangeness in himself and because he did not want to worry her. He did not know the cause of his irrational fear, but he knew he would conquer it sooner or later, so there was no sense in humiliating himself and causing Faye unnecessary anxiety over a temporary condition. He refused to believe that it was serious. He had been ill only rarely in his 52 years. He had only been laid up in the hospital once, after taking a bullet in the butt and another one in the back during his second tour of duty in Vietnam. There had never been mental illness in his family, and Ernest Eugene Black was absolutely sure as hell and without a doubt not going to be the first one of his clan to go crawling and whimpering to his psychiatrist's couch. You could bet your ass on that and never have to worry that you would sit on. And never have to worry what you would sit on. He would tough this out, weird as it was, unsettling as it was. It had begun in September, a vague uneasiness that built in him as nightfall approached, and that remained until dawn. At first he was not troubled every night, but it got steadily worse, and by the middle of October, dusk always brought with it an inexplicable spiritual distress. By early November, the distress became fear, and during the past 2 weeks his anxiety grew until now his days were measured and almost totally defined by this perplexing fear of the darkness to come. For the past 10 days he'd avoided going out after nightfall, and thus far Faye had not noticed, though she could not remain oblivious much longer. Ernie Black was so big that it was ridiculous for him to be afraid of anything. He was 6 feet tall and so solidly and squarely built that his surname was equally suitable to a one-word description of him. His wiry gray hair was brush-cut, revealing slabs of skull bone, and his facial features were clean and appealing, though so squared off he looked as if he had been carved out of granite. His thick neck, massive shoulders, and barrel chest gave him a top-heavy appearance. When he had been a high school football star, the other players called him Bull, and during his 28-year career in the Marines, from which he had been retired for 6 years, most people called him Sir, even some who were of equal rank. They would be astonished to learn that, lately, Ernie Black's palms got sweaty every day when sunset drew near. Now, intent upon keeping his thoughts far from sunset, he dawdled over the repairs to the counter and finally finished at 3:45. The quality of the daylight had changed. It was no longer honey-colored, but amber orange, and the sun was drawing down toward the west. At 4 o'clock, he got his first check-in, a couple his own age, Mr. and Mrs. Gilney, who were heading home to Salt Lake City after spending a week in Reno visiting their son. He chatted with them and was disappointed when they took their key and left. The sunlight was completely orange, now burnt orange, no yellow in it at all. The high, scattered clouds had been transformed from white sailing ships to gold and scarlet galleons, gliding eastward above the Great Basin in which almost the entire state of Nevada lay. 10 minutes later, a cadaverous man visiting the area on special assignment for the Bureau of Land Management took a room for 2 days. Alone again, Ernie tried not to look at his watch. He tried not to look at the windows either, for beyond the glass the day was bleeding away. I'm not going to panic, he told himself. I've been to war, seen the worst a man can see, and by gosh, I'm still here, still as big and ugly as ever, so I won't come unglued just because night is coming. By 4:50, the sunlight was no longer orange, but bloody red. His heart was speeding up. He began to feel as if his ribcage had become a vice that was squeezing his vital organs between its jaws. He went to the desk, sat down in the chair, closed his eyes, and did some deep breathing exercises to calm himself. He turned on the radio. Sometimes music helped. Kenny Rogers was singing about loneliness. The sun touched the horizon and slowly sank out of sight. The crimson afternoon faded to electric blue, then to a luminous purple that reminded Ernie of Days End in Singapore, where he had been stationed for 2 years as an embassy guard when he had been a young recruit. It came, the twilight, then worse, night. The outside lights, including the blue and green neon sign that could be seen clearly from the freeway, had blinked on automatically as dusk crept in, but that had not made Ernie feel any better. Dawn was an eternity away. Night ruled. With the dying of the light, the outside temperature fell below freezing. To cut the chill in the office, the oil furnace kicked in more frequently. In spite of the chill, Ernie Black was sweating. At 6 o'clock, Sandy Sarver dashed over from the Tranquility Grill, which stood west of the motel. It was a small sandwich shop with a limited menu, serving only lunch and dinner to the guests and to hungry truckers who swung in from the highway for a bite. Parentheses, breakfast for guests was complimentary sweet rolls and coffee delivered to their rooms if they asked for it the night before. Close parentheses. Sandy, 32, and her husband Ned ran the restaurant for Ernie and Faye. Sandy waited tables and Ned cooked. They lived in a trailer up near Beowulf and drove in every day in their battered Ford pickup. Ernie winced when Sandy entered, for when she opened the door, he had the irrational feeling that the darkness outside would spring, panther-like, into the office. "Brought supper?" Sandy said, shivering in the gusts of cold air that entered with her. She set a small, lidless cardboard box on the counter. It held a cheeseburger, french fries, a plastic container of coleslaw, and a can of Coors. "Figured you need a Coors to sluice all of this cholesterol out of your system." "Thanks, Sandy." Sandy Sarver was not much to look at, plain and washed out, even drab, even though she had more potential than she realized. Her legs were too thin, but not unattractive. She was underweight, but if she put on 15 or even 20 pounds, she would have a reasonably good shape. She was flat-chested, though an appealing suppleness compensated for her lack of amplitude, and she had a charming feminine delicateness, most apparent in her small boned, slender arms and swan-like neck. Also, she possessed an infrequently seen but arresting gracefulness that was usually disguised by her habit of shuffling when she walked and slumping round-shouldered when she sat. Her brown hair was lusterless and limp, probably because she washed it with soap instead of shampoo. She never wore makeup, not even lipstick. Her nails were bitten and neglected. However, she was good-hearted, with a generous spirit, which was why Ernie and Faye wished she could look better and get more out of life. Sometimes Ernie worried about her the same way he used to worry about Lucy, his own daughter, before Lucy found and married Frank and became so obviously perfectly happy. He sensed that something bad had happened to Sandy Sarver a long time ago, that she had taken a very hard blow which had not broken her, but had taught her to keep a low profile, to keep her head ducked down, to harbor only meager expectations in order to protect herself from disappointment, pain, and human cruelty. Relishing the aroma of the food, popping the tab on the Coors, Ernie said, "Ned makes the best darn cheeseburgers I've ever eaten." Sandy smiled shyly. "It's a blessing having a man who cooks." Her voice was soft, meek, especially in my case, because I'm no good at it. "Oh, I'll bet you're a fine cook, too," Ernie said. No, not me, not even a little bit. Never was, never will be." He looked at her bare, goose-pimpled arms, exposed by her short-sleeved uniform. "You shouldn't come out on a night like this without a sweater. You'll catch your death." "Not me," she said. I got used to the cold a long time ago." That seemed an odd thing to say, and the tone of voice in which she said it was even odder. But before Ernie could think of a way to draw her out and discover her meaning, she headed toward the door. "See you later, Ernie." Much business?" "Some, and the truckers will be pulling in for supper soon." She paused with the door open. "You sure keep it bright in here." A bite of cheeseburger stuck in his throat when she opened the door. She was exposing him to the dangers of the darkness. Cold air swept in. "You could get a tan in here," she said. I like it bright. People come into a motel office that's dimly lit. Well, the impression is it's dirty." "Oh, I would have never thought of that. Guess that's why you're the boss. I was in charge, I'd never think of little things like that. I'm no good at details. Gotta scoot." He held his breath while the door was open, sighed with relief when she pulled it shut behind her. He watched her scurry past the windows and out of sight. He could not remember ever hearing Sandy admit to a virtue. Likewise, she never hesitated to point out her faults and shortcomings, both real and imagined. The kid was sweet, but she was sometimes dreary company. Tonight, of course, even dreary company was welcome. He was sorry to see her go. At the counter, eating while standing up, Ernie concentrated intently on his food, not once lifting his eyes from it until he was done, using it to take his mind off the irrational fear that made his scalp prickle and kept the cold sweat trickling down from his armpits. By 6:50, 8 of the motel's 20 rooms were occupied. Because it was the second night of a 4-day holiday weekend with more than the usual number of travelers, he would rent out at least another 8 units if he stayed open until 9 o'clock. He could not do it. He was a Marine, retired but still a Marine, to whom the words duty and courage were sacred, and he had never failed to do his duty. Not even in Vietnam, not even with bullets flying and bombs bursting and people dying on all sides. But he was incapable of the simple task of manning the motel desk until 9 o'clock. There were no drapes at the big office windows, no blind over the glass door, no way to escape the sight of darkness. Each time the door opened, he was sick with dread because no barrier lay between him and the night. He looked at his big, strong hands. They were trembling. His sour stomach churned. He was so jumpy he could not keep still. He paced the small work area. He fiddled with this and that. Finally, at 7:15, surrendering to his irrational anxiety, he used a switch under the counter to turn on the no vacancy sign outside, and he locked the front door. He clicked off the lamps, one at a time, edging away from the shadows that rushed in where light had ruled, and he quickly retreated to the rear of the room. Steps led up to the owner's apartment on the second floor. He intended to climb them at an ordinary pace, telling himself that it was silly and stupid to be afraid, telling himself that nothing was coming after him from the dark corners of the office behind. Nothing. Such a ridiculous thought. Nothing, absolutely nothing. But reassurances of that sort did him no good whatsoever, for it was not something in the dark that scared him. He was instead terrified by the darkness itself, by the mere absence of light. He started moving faster, grabbing at the handrail. To his chagrin, he quickly panicked and bounded up the steps 2 at a time. At the top, heart pounding, Ernie stumbled into the living room, fumbled for the wall switch, snapped off the last of the lights below, slammed the door so hard that the whole wall seemed to shake, locked it, and leaned with his broad back against it. He could not stop gasping. He could not stop shaking either. He could smell his own rank sweat. Several lights had been burning in the apartment during the day, but a few were unlit. He hurried from room to room, clicking on every lamp and ceiling fixture. The drapes and shades were all drawn tight from his previous nocturnal ordeal, so he had not a single glimpse of the blackness beyond the windows. When he had regained control of himself, he phoned the Tranquility Grill and told Sandy that he was not feeling well, that he had shut down early. He asked them to keep the day's receipts until tomorrow morning rather than bother him tonight when they closed the restaurant. Sickened by his pungent perspiration odor, not so much by the smell itself as by the total loss of control that the smell represented, Ernie showered. After he had toweled himself dry, he put on fresh underwear, belted himself into a thick warm robe, and stepped into slippers. Heretofore, in spite of his bewilderingly unfocused apprehension, he had been able to sleep in a dark room, though not without anxiety, and not without the aid of a couple of beers. Then, 2 nights ago, with Faye in Wisconsin, when he was alone, he was able to nod off only with the constant companionship of the nightstand lamp. He knew he would need that luminous comfort tonight as well. And when Faye returned on Tuesday, would he be able to go back to sleeping without a light? What if Faye turned off the lights and he started screaming like a badly frightened child? The thought of that impending humiliation made him grind his teeth with anger and drove him to the nearest window. He put one beefy hand on the tightly drawn drapes, hesitated. His heart did an imitation of muffled machine gun fire. He had always been strong for Faye, a rock on which she could depend. That was what a man was supposed to be, a rock. He must not let Faye down. He had to overcome this bizarre affliction before she returned from Wisconsin. His mouth went dry, and a chill returned when he thought about what lay beyond the now concealed glass. But he knew the only way to beat this thing was to confront it. That was the lesson life had taught him. Be bold, confront the enemy, engage in battle. That philosophy of action had always worked for him. It would work again. This window looked out from the back of the motel, across the vast meadows and hills of the uninhabited uplands, and the only light out there was what fell from the stars. He must pull the drapes aside, come face to face with that tenebrous landscape, stand fast, endure it. Confrontation would be a purgative, flushing the poison from his system. Ernie pulled open the drapes. He peered out at the night and told himself that this perfect blackness was not so bad. Deep and pure, vast and cold, but not malevolent, and in no way a personal threat. However, As he watched, unmoving and unmovable, portions of the darkness seemed to shift, to coalesce, forming into not quite visible but nonetheless solid shapes, lumps of pulsing and denser blackness within the greater blackness, lurking phantoms that at any moment might launch themselves toward the fragile window. He clenched his jaws, put his forehead against the ice-cold glass. The Nevada Barrens, a huge emptiness to begin with, now seemed to expand even farther. He could not see the night-cloaked mountains, but he sensed that they were magically receding, that the plains between him and the mountains were growing larger, extending outward hundreds of miles, thousands, expanding swiftly toward infinity, until suddenly he was at the center of a void so immense that it defied description. On all sides of him there was emptiness and lightlessness beyond man's ability to measure, beyond the limits of his own feeble imagination, a terrible emptiness to the left and right, front and back, above and below. And suddenly he could not breathe. This was considerably worse than anything he had known before, a deeper-reaching fear, profound, shocking in its power, and it was in total control of him. Abruptly he was aware of all the weight of that enormous darkness, and it seemed to be sliding inexorably in upon him, sliding and sliding, incalculably high walls of heavy darkness, collapsing, pressing down, squeezing the breath out of him. He screamed and threw himself back from the window. He fell to his knees as the drapes dropped into place with a soft rustle. The window was hidden again. The darkness was concealed. All around him was light, blessed light. He hung his head, shuddered, and took great gulps of air. He crawled to the bed and hoisted himself onto the mattress, where he lay for a long time listening to his heartbeat, which was like footfalls, sprinting, then running, then just walking fast inside him. Instead of solving his problem, bold confrontation had made it worse. "What's happening here?" he said aloud, staring at the ceiling. "What's wrong with me? Dear God, what's wrong with me?" It was November 22nd.